It was a quiet evening, and I was comfortably settled in my small apartment, lost in a book. The calm of the night wrapped around me like a warm blanket, creating a serene atmosphere that I cherished. Suddenly, a loud knock at the door shattered the tranquility. The unexpected sound startled me, pulling me out of my literary world. I glanced at the clock and realized it was nearly 10 p.m. It was strange. No one was supposed to visit, especially not at this hour. My friends knew better than to drop by unannounced, especially so late. Curiosity mingled with a hint of nervousness as I moved towards the door. The sense of the unknown on the other side filled me with a mix of unease and an unfamiliar excitement. I couldn't quite explain it, but something about this unexpected visitor felt different. Taking a deep breath, I steadied myself and walked towards the door, each step a blend of curiosity and caution that seemed to amplify the silence around me. When I reached the door, I paused, almost anticipating another knock. My heartbeat was the only sound filling the stillness of the room. I peered through the peephole and was met with a sight I hadn't expected: a police officer standing in the hallway. He looked to be in his early 30s, with a strong jawline and a calm, steady, but there was something else about him, a sort of restrained intensity that held me rooted to the spot, even as my mind raced to figure out why he was there. "Good evening," he said, his deep voice carrying easily through the door. I slowly opened it, and he continued, "I'm Officer Daniel Tate. Are you Mr. I nodded, feeling my pulse quicken. "Yes, that's me. Is there a He gave a slight, reassuring smile, but didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a quick glance down the hallway and then back at me, his eyes steady. "Mind if I come in for a..." he asked. A little surprised, I stepped aside, watching as he entered. There was a certain confidence in the way he moved, as if he'd done this 1,000 times. Though I noticed a quick, almost subconscious survey of my apartment, I closed the door behind him. For a moment, I felt a surge of nerve. It wasn't every day a police officer showed up at your place, let alone someone like. "Is everything all right?" I asked, crossing my arms in an attempt to appear calm and. "Nothing to worry about, Mr. Carter," he replied, glancing around before his eyes settled on mine again. "I'm just here to check on a few things in the neighborhood. We've had some reports of suspicious activity in the area lately. Thought I'd see if you'd noticed anything unusual." I shook my head, feeling both relieved and oddly disappointed.
No, I haven't.
"It's been pretty quiet around here as far as I know." "Good to hear," he said, his gaze lingering on me just a moment longer than necessary. Though it never hurts to stay calm. You never know what might be going on behind closed doors. There was something in his tone, something almost cryptic, that made my skin prick. He wasn't exactly making small talk, and the way he looked at me seemed to hint at something more, though I couldn't quite put my finger on. "So, is this part of your usual rounds, officer?" I asked, attempting to lighten. He shrugged slightly, a hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Well, I can't say every call involves dropping by someone's apartment just to chat, but now and then it's worth going the extra mile." He held my gaze, the intensity of it pulling me in, making the room feel suddenly smaller. The silence that followed was thick with something I didn't have a name for, and I felt my throat tighten. This was unlike any encounter I'd had before. There was a sort of electricity in the air that made it hard to think straight. I told myself it was just the uniform, the whole police thing, but deep down I knew there was more to. Finally, he broke the silence. "So, how long have you been living here, Mr. Carter?" "Call me Alex," I replied, feeling a little awkward calling myself Mr. Carter. "It's been about a year." "Alex, then," he said, giving a nod. "Nice place you've got. Quiet. I can see why you'd choose it." His compliment caught me off guard, and I felt a strange sense of pride swell in my. "Thanks. Yeah, it's nice, though I don't get a lot of visitors. Mostly just work." "Work keeps you busy, huh?" he asked, sounding genuinely. "Yeah, I'm a graphic designer," I explained, still feeling a little awkward but oddly compelled to keep the conversation going. "A lot of late nights, a lot of deadlines. Keeps me on my toes, I guess." "I know he replied, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. Though in my line of work, the late nights usually involve a bit more unpredictability. The way he said it made my imagination run wild, picturing him in situations far more intense than I'd ever find myself in. I wondered what that must feel like, to never really know what your night would bring, to have that level of responsibility and pressure hanging over you every day. As if sensing my thoughts, he glanced at me, his expression softening just a little. You must enjoy what you do. I mean, it's not everyone who's got the patience to work with deadlines all the time. I smiled, feeling a little more at ease. It has its moments, but yeah, I guess I wouldn't do it if I didn't like. There was a pause, and for a brief moment, it felt as though we were just two guys talking about life, sharing a moment. But then his gaze shifted, and the atmosphere shifted with the familiar weight of authority settled back onto his shoulders, reminding me of who he was and who I was. Alex, he said, his voice quieter now. I have to ask, do you ever feel uneasy here, being on your own? The question caught me off guard, and I felt my heart race again. I mean, not usually. Why? No reason in particular, he replied, though the way he said it made me wonder if there was in fact. It's just, well, sometimes people don't notice when there's something a little off in their own space. Sometimes it's easier to miss the details. His words lingered in the air, a strange tension building between us that I couldn't shake. I didn't know what he was hinting at, if anything, but the way he looked at me, as if he was seeing something no one else had seen, left me feeling exposed, like he'd peeled back a layer of me I hadn't even known was there. But the story didn't end there, of course. Officer Tate leaned back against my kitchen counter. His stance relaxed, but his gaze anything but. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of intensity, that seemed to go beyond the typical police professionalism. My mind was spinning, unsure of what to make of it. We'd barely known each other for 10 minutes, and yet the air between us felt thick, charged with an energy I couldn't ignore. Hope you don't mind if I stay for a little while longer, he said, his voice. Neighborhood checks don't usually require a lot of time, but I feel like there's more I should ask. My heartbeat quickened, though I couldn't pinpoint what. No problem, I replied, hoping I sounded casual. Ask. His eyes held mine, a smile ghosting over his lips, almost imperceptible. Have you ever felt unsettled? His question hung between us, open-ended, leaving room for implications I couldn't ignore. Not really, I answered, swallowing hard. I mean, I've always liked the quiet. No complaints. Good, he nodded, but his gaze didn't soften. Quiet is good, but sometimes quiet neighborhoods can be deceiving. Sometimes it's where unexpected things happen. There was a weight to his words, a sense of something unspoken. I couldn't decide if he was just doing his job, keeping the air of authority that came with his uniform, or if there was something more, something directed at me specifically. It was like a puzzle I couldn't quite piece together, and I didn't even know where to start. So, Officer Tate, I began, but he cut me off. Call me Daniel. His voice was warm, almost coaxing, and he moved a step closer, as though closing the space between us on purpose. Daniel, I repeated his name, feeling strange on my tongue, as if I were crossing some invisible line just by saying it. What exactly are you getting at? He held my gaze, unflinching, and I could feel the tension intensify, a silent exchange passing between us that I couldn't ignore. Nothing specific, just making sure everything's in order, he replied, though the look in his eyes told a different story. I shifted uncomfortably under his gaze, glancing around my kitchen for something, anything to ground myself, but his presence was like a magnet, pulling my attention back to him every time I tried to look away. The intensity in his eyes seemed to deepen, as though he were reading something in me I hadn't shared, a part of myself I hadn't intended to reveal. So, what else should I know about the area? I asked, my voice more unsteady than I intended. Just that sometimes things aren't as simple as they seem, he said, his tone soft but edged with something I couldn't quite place. Sometimes it's the people we least expect who surprise us the most. There it was again, that strange undercurrent in his voice, like he was talking about more than just the neighborhood. I felt my pulse quicken, and I couldn't help but wonder if he was trying to tell me something without actually saying it. But before I could figure it out, he shifted his gaze, giving me a moment to catch my breath. So, Alex, he said, and the sound of my name from his lips sent a strange electric thrill through me. What made you choose this place, this neighborhood? I shrugged, trying to keep my tone casual. I wanted a fresh start, I guess, a place where I could focus on work without any distractions. He raised an eyebrow, a slight smirk forming on his face. Distractions, huh? Well, I hate to break it to you, but sometimes distractions have a way of finding us. The air grew heavier, and I felt a warmth creep up my neck. His words held a teasing edge, but there was something more behind them, something that made it hard to ignore the way he was looking at me, as if he was waiting for me to cross a line, to make a move. I couldn't quite tell if it was my imagination or if there was something tangible in the way his gaze lingered, the faintest hint of a challenge in his eyes. I laughed, trying to break the tension. Well, I hope I don't have too many of those, trying to keep things simple. Simple isn't always interesting, he murmured, his gaze unwavering. My pulse raced, and suddenly I was very aware of the distance between us, or the lack of it. I found myself drawn to him, and even though my mind was telling me to keep things professional, there was something about his presence that made me want to ignore logic, to lean into whatever this was, this unspoken connection simmering between us. His voice lowered, breaking the silence. There's a fine line between professional and personal, Alex, he said, almost as though he'd read my thoughts. His words hit me like a jolt, and I found myself searching his face for any sign of humor, anything to suggest he was just joking. But his expression was serious, his gaze steady. In that moment, the last bit of pretense between us seemed to dissolve. I fumbled for words, unsure of how to respond. I don't usually have officers visiting my place at night, so maybe I needed one this time, he replied, his voice barely above a whisper, but it felt like a promise, an invitation wrapped in mystery. The words hung in the air, and I found myself leaning slightly closer without even realizing it, drawn into his orbit. The tension was undeniable, a quiet storm brewing just beneath the surface, and I felt as if I were standing on the edge of something I didn't fully understand. Daniel, I said, my voice soft, tentative, testing the waters. Yes, Alex. His gaze softened, his expression shifting ever so slightly, as though he too felt the unspoken pull between us. There was a part of me that wanted to back away, to laugh it off, to say something light-hearted that would dissolve the tension hanging between us, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I held his gaze, feeling the intensity of the moment build every second, adding another layer to the quiet tension between us. Nothing, I said finally, breaking eye contact, my heart pounding. Nothing. But I knew it wasn't nothing. He knew it too. The silence that followed was heavy with everything we weren't saying, 1,000 words left unspoken, each one carrying the weight of possibility. When he finally looked away, I felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment, as though I'd missed an opportunity I didn't quite understand. He adjusted his collar, clearing his throat. All right. Well, I should probably be going, but he didn't move right away, his gaze lingering on me one last time, as though he were waiting for me to stop him, to say something that would keep him here. And maybe, for a moment, I wanted to. Thanks for stopping by, I said, trying to sound casual, even though my heart was racing. He nodded, giving me a small, almost hesitant smile. Anytime, Alex. Stay safe, all right? I will, I replied, though my voice sounded distant, as if the words were coming from somewhere far away. With a final nod, he turned and made his way to the door, leaving me standing there, feeling like I'd just come out of a dream. And as the door clicked shut behind him, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that the encounter had left a mark I couldn't ignore. But of course, this wasn't the end. The days that followed were strangely quiet. Every time I looked at my phone, I half expected a message from Daniel, but there was nothing. Life carried on as usual, but my mind kept drifting back to that night, to the way he'd looked at me, the things he'd said that had lingered in my thoughts far longer than they should have. I told myself to forget it, to let it go as a one-time encounter, a strange but innocent visit from a concerned police officer. But each night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was unfinished, like there was a thread connecting us that hadn't quite reached its end. Then one evening, as I was locking up, there was a knock on my door. My heart leapt in my chest, and when I opened it, I felt a surge of relief, mixed with something else I couldn't name. Daniel stood there, out of uniform, looking almost as surprised as I felt. Hey, he said, his voice softer than I remembered. Hey, I replied, suddenly aware of the fact that I hadn't seen him in days, that I'd been thinking about him more than I cared to admit. What brings you here? He looked down, as though searching for the right words, and I noticed a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. I was in the area, and, well, I thought I'd stop by. See how you were doing. Thanks, I managed, feeling a bit awkward but grateful that he'd come. "You want to come in?" He nodded, and I stepped aside, feeling the strange thrill of his presence filling my apartment once again. This time, he seemed more at ease, and I found myself relaxing too, even though my heart was racing. "So," he began, glancing around as if to ground himself. "You been doing all right?" "Yeah," I said, though I knew it wasn't quite true. "I've been restless, distracted, but I wasn't about to admit that. Just the usual work and, well, not much else." He nodded, his gaze drifting back to me. "It's funny," he said almost to himself. "I feel like I don't usually get this invested in neighborhood checks." His words hung between us, and I couldn't stop the smile that crept onto my face. "Oh yeah? Guess I should feel flattered." Daniel laughed, the sound warm and genuine, and suddenly the space between us felt a little smaller, the air a little warmer. "I guess so, Alex," he said, his voice quiet. "I guess so." There was a pause, a long, weighted silence that neither of us seemed willing to break. His eyes held mine, searching, and I felt a rush of warmth spread through me. I wanted to say something, anything to break the silence, but words escaped me. Then, as if pulled by some invisible force, he took a step closer. I could feel his breath warm against my skin, and my heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't just a friendly visit anymore. This was something more, something neither of us could deny. I swallowed, my throat dry, but I didn't move. I didn't want to. "Ben," he murmured, his voice barely more than a whisper, but it was enough to send a shiver down my spine. "Yeah," I replied, my own voice soft, hesitant, unsure of what was happening, but not wanting it to stop. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. Instead, he reached out, his fingers brushing against my hand, tentative, as if waiting for permission. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. And in that moment, I knew that whatever this was, whatever had brought him back to my door, I wanted it too. Slowly, as if testing the boundaries of something fragile, he leaned in, his eyes never leaving mine. My heart raced, each beat a thunderous echo in the silence. But I didn't move. And then, before I could second-guess it, his lips brushed against mine. The kiss was soft, gentle, almost hesitant, as if we were both afraid to break the spell. But it was real, and the warmth of his touch sent a shiver through. I felt my own hand moving, reaching up to touch his face, to pull him closer. And he responded, his arm wrapping around me, drawing me. It was a slow, tentative dance, each of us exploring the other, feeling out the boundaries of something new, something unexpected. His hand moved to the back of my neck, his fingers warm and steady, grounding me as the kiss deepened, as the world around us faded away. In that moment, nothing else mattered. It was just us, just the quiet, shared space between us, and the intensity of something that had been simmering beneath the surface, finally breaking free. He pulled back slightly, his forehead resting against mine, his breath warm against my skin. I opened my eyes, meeting his gaze, and for a moment, we just stood there, lost in each other, the weight of what had just happened settling between. "Daniel," I said, my voice barely a whisper, as though speaking too loudly might shatter the moment. He smiled, his thumb brushing gently over my cheek. "I know," he said, his voice soft. "I didn't plan this. I didn't think," I admitted, feeling a strange sense of vulnerability but also a thrill I couldn't ignore. "Me neither," he admitted, and I felt a surge of warmth fill me. "But I'm glad you're here." His smile widened, and I felt his hand slip down to mine, his fingers entwining with mine in a way that felt natural, like something I'd been waiting for, without realizing. "So am I, Alex," he murmured, his voice filled with something that felt like relief. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, neither of us willing to break the spell, to let go of the connection we'd found. Eventually, he pulled me into a gentle embrace, his arms wrapping around me, his warmth seeping into me in a way that felt grounding. For once, the silence between us wasn't heavy or awkward. It was calm, peaceful, filled with an unspoken understanding that didn't need words. I rested my head against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and I knew that whatever this was, it was something I wanted, something that felt right. But as much as I wanted to stay like this, to lose myself in the warmth of his embrace, I knew we couldn't stay like this forever. Slowly, reluctantly, I pulled back, meeting his gaze, searching his eyes for some kind of reassurance. "Where do we go from here?" I asked, my voice quiet, uncertain. He looked at me, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Honestly, I don't know, but I want to find out if you're—" A surge of warmth filled me, and I felt a smile spread across my face. "Yeah, I think I—" Daniel's face softened, and he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in another soft, lingering kiss. This time, there was a quiet intensity to it, a sense of something deeper, something that went beyond words. It was a promise, a shared understanding that whatever happened next, we'd face it together. When he finally pulled back, his fingers still entwined with mine, he looked at me with a quiet confidence that left me feeling grounded. "I'll be here, Alex," he said softly. "Whenever you need." I nodded, my heart pounding, but I didn't say anything. I didn't need. Instead, I just held on to him, letting the moment linger, letting the warmth of his presence fill the empty spaces I hadn't even realized. And though I didn't know what the future held, I knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. The days that followed Daniel's visit blurred together in a mix of excitement and quiet apprehension. We hadn't made any grand declarations or set any terms. It was just something we were both drawn to, something we knew was worth exploring. I kept going about my daily routines, but everything felt lighter, as though I was seeing the world through a new lens. It wasn't long before we found ourselves spending more time together. Daniel would show up unexpectedly, usually after his shift, his smile warm and familiar, as he stepped into my apartment, bringing a sense of calm that seemed to fill. It was becoming our ritual, this shared space where the outside world faded, and it was just the two of us. One evening, as he sat across from me on the couch, his arm casually draped along the back, he looked over at me with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he began, a playful glint in his eyes, "I didn't think my job would ever lead me." I laughed, unable to help myself. "Yeah, I'd say neighborhood checks don't typically go this way. I guess we're breaking new ground." He grinned, a hint of mischief in his smile. "Can't say I mind, though." He reached for my hand, lacing his fingers through mine, and I felt a familiar warmth spread through me, steadying, grounding. "You're not worried?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. It was a question that had lingered in the back of my mind, though I hadn't voiced it until now. "I mean, being an officer, isn't there some expectation?" He looked down, his thumb tracing gentle patterns over my knuckles. "There's always an expectation, Alex," he said finally, his tone thoughtful. "But sometimes expectations aren't everything. Sometimes you have to choose what's right for you, even if it doesn't fit the mold." I nodded, comforted by his words, but a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that we were treading in uncertain territory. I guess I just didn't want to make things harder for him. He lifted his gaze, his eyes serious. "You're not," he said firmly. "You're the opposite of that, actually." He gave a small laugh, almost as if he couldn't believe his own words. "You're one of the few things that feels real, that feels like I can just be myself." The weight of his words settled between us, and I felt a strange sense of clarity, as though everything had aligned in that moment. "I feel the same," I admitted, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. "It's like everything else fades when I'm with you." He smiled, and I could see the tension in his expression ease. We sat there in comfortable silence, his hand warm in mine, each of us content to let the quiet speak for us. As the weeks passed, our connection only deepened. We found little ways to keep each other closely text in the middle of the day, a quick coffee stop between shifts moments that were simple but meant everything. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace, a quiet happiness that made the world feel a little brighter. But not everything stayed calm. There were moments of doubt, of uncertainty, especially when reality crept. One evening, Daniel was at my place, relaxed and laughing at some story I'd told him, when his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his face changing almost imperceptibly, but enough that I noticed. "Everything okay?" I asked, hoping my voice sounded casual. He nodded, but his smile didn't reach his eye. "Yeah, just work stuff." He slipped his phone back into his pocket, but I could tell something was weighing. "You sure?" I pressed, not wanting to pry but unable to ignore the shift in his. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's complicated. Sometimes being with you feels like this escape, this amazing thing I didn't know I needed. But then I remember, well, it's just hard sometimes, balancing things." I reached over, resting a hand on his knee. I get it, Daniel. You don't have to explain everything to me. I just want you to know I'm here whenever you need. He looked at me, a mixture of gratitude and something deeper in his eyes. Thank you, Alex, he said softly. It means more than you know. And just like that, the tension dissolved, leaving us back in that quiet space where words weren't necessary. He pulled me closer, his arms wrapping around me as we settled into a comfortable silence, each of us content just to be there, to hold on to the quiet moments that made everything else seem manageable. But as much as we tried to stay in that space, reality had a way of intruding. One night, Daniel was working late, and I found myself alone. My phone buzzed, and when I saw his name, a wave of relief washed over me. But the message was short, almost Hey, can I stop by? Need to talk. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that left me unsettled. I replied quickly, letting him know he was always welcome, though I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. When he arrived, he looked exhausted, his usual calm replaced by a heaviness I hadn't seen before. He stepped inside, and before I could say anything, he pulled me into a tight hug, as though grounding himself, as though holding on was the only thing keeping him. Alex, he began, his voice quiet, filled with something I couldn't quite place. I've been thinking a lot, actually. I waited, my heart pounding as I braced myself for whatever he was about to say. I can't keep living like this, he continued, his voice raw. I can't keep hiding, keep pretending that this, what we have, doesn't mean everything. A surge of relief washed over me, and I tightened my hold on. Daniel, you don't have to pretend, not with me. He pulled back slightly, his gaze, and in that moment, I saw the depth of his struggle, the weight he'd been. But it's not just you, Al, he said, his voice barely a whisper. It's everything else, my job, my family. I've tried to keep them separate, to keep this safe, but it's hard. I reached up, cupping his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. Daniel, we'll find a way. We'll figure it. He closed his eyes, leaning into my touch, and I felt the tension ease just. I know, he murmured, his voice softer. I know we. That night, we stayed up talking about everything we hadn't said before. Our fears, our hopes, the things we wanted but hadn't dared to ask. And by the time the sun began to rise, there was a sense of clarity, a quiet understanding that whatever challenges lay ahead, we'd face them together. Over the weeks that followed, we took things slowly, finding our way in the uncharted territory of a life shift. There were moments of doubt, moments when the weight of reality pressed down on us. But each time, we found our way back to each other, holding on to the connection that had brought us together in the first place. And as I sat there, watching him laugh, feeling the warmth of his hand in mine, I knew that whatever came next, whatever challenges or obstacles lay ahead, we would face them together. Because sometimes life gives you exactly what you need, even when you didn't know you were looking for. Our story wasn't perfect. It wasn't without its struggles or complications, but it was real. And that, in the end, was enough. The months that followed were a whirlwind of emotions, a delicate dance between the comfort of the familiar and the thrill of the unknown. Daniel and I continued to navigate the complexities of our relationship, each day bringing us closer while also presenting new challenges. One evening, as we sat on the balcony of my apartment, the city lights twinkling below us, Daniel turned to me with a thoughtful expression. You know, he began, his voice steady yet tinged with a hint of uncertainty. I've been thinking about my future, about where I want to be in a few years. I nodded, encouraging him to continue. What have you been thinking about? He took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the horizon. I've always loved being a police officer, the sense of purpose it gives me, the opportunity to make a difference. But lately, I've been wondering if there's more to life, if there's something else out there that could fulfill me in a different way. I listened intently, sensing the weight of his words. Have you thought about what that might be? He shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. Not exactly. It's just a feeling, you know? Like, there's something more waiting for me, something beyond the badge and the uniform. I reached for his hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. It's okay to feel that way, Daniel. It's important to explore what makes you happy, to find your true calling. He turned to me, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and vulnerability. Thank you, Alex. It means a lot to have your support. But what about you? Have you ever thought about changing direction? Pursuing something different? I pondered his question, realizing that I too had been grappling with similar thoughts. I've always loved graphic design, but lately I've been feeling a bit restless. Maybe it's time for me to explore new creative avenues, to push myself beyond my comfort zone. Daniel's face lit up with a smile. That's great, Alex. I think you should go for it. And who knows, maybe our paths will lead us to something even more amazing together. His words resonated with me, filling me with a sense of hope and possibility. We spent the rest of the evening brainstorming ideas, dreaming about the future, and supporting each other's aspirations. As the weeks went by, we both began to take steps towards our new goal. Daniel started taking classes in criminal psychology, intrigued by the idea of understanding the minds of those he encountered in his line of work. Meanwhile, I began experimenting with different art forms, exploring digital illustration and animation. Our lives were becoming more intertwined, not just in our personal relationship, but also in our professional pursuit. We found ourselves collaborating on small projects, combining our skills to create something unique and meaningful. It was a fulfilling experience, one that brought us even closer together. One afternoon, as we were working on a project in my living room, Daniel looked up from his laptop with a serious expression. "Alex," he said, his voice filled with a newfound determination, "I've been thinking about making a big change." My heart skipped a beat, curious about what he was about to say. "What kind of change?" He took a deep breath, his gaze steady. "I've decided to apply for a position in the criminal investigation department. It's a big step, but I feel like it's the right move for me, a chance to make a deeper impact." I smiled, feeling a surge of pride and admiration. "That's incredible, Daniel. I know you'll be amazing at it. I'm so proud." He returned my smile, his eyes filled with warmth. "Thank you, Alex. And what about you? Any new developments in your creative?" I nodded, excitement bubbling up inside me. "Actually, yes. I've been approached by a local art gallery to showcase some of my... It's a small exhibition, but it's a huge opportunity." Daniel's face lit up with joy. "That's amazing, Alex. I'm so happy for you. We both have some exciting things happening." We shared a moment of celebration, acknowledging the progress we had made and the potential that lay ahead. It was a reminder that our relationship was not just about supporting each other through challenges, but also about celebrating each other's successes and encouraging each other to pursue our dreams. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, our lives continued to evolve. We faced new challenges, both individually and as a couple, but we faced them together, drawing strength from our shared journey. One evening, as we sat on the couch, wrapped in each other's arms, Daniel looked at me with a tender expression. "You know, Alex," he said softly, "I never imagined my life would take this path, but I'm so grateful it. Being with you has made me a better person, and I can't wait to see where our journey takes us next." I leaned into him, feeling a deep sense of contentment. "I feel the same way, Daniel. We've come a long way, and I know there's so much more ahead for us." We sat in comfortable silence, the world outside fading away, leaving only the quiet understanding that whatever the future held, we would face it together. And as the evening light slowly faded, I knew that this was just the beginning of an incredible journey, one filled with love, growth, and endless possibility. The months that followed were a whirlwind of emotions, a delicate dance between the comfort of the familiar and the thrill of the unknown. Daniel and I continued to navigate the complexities of our relationship, each day bringing us closer while also presenting new challenges. One evening, as we sat on the balcony of my apartment, the city lights twinkling below us, Daniel turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he began, his voice steady yet tinged with a hint of uncertainty, "I've been thinking about my future, about where I want to be in a few years." I nodded, encouraging him to continue. "What have you been thinking about?" He took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I've always loved being a police officer, the sense of purpose it gives me, the opportunity to make a difference. But lately, I've been wondering if there's more to life, if there's something else out there that could fulfill me in a different way." I listened intently, sensing the weight of his words. "Have you thought about what that might be?" He shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. "Not exactly. It's just a feeling, you know, like there's something more waiting for me, something beyond the badge and the uniform." I reached for his hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "It's okay to feel that way, Daniel. It's important to explore what makes you happy, to find your true calling." He turned to me, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and vulnerability. "Thank you, Alex. It means a lot to have your support. But what about you? Have you ever thought about changing direction, pursuing something different?" I pondered his question, realizing that I, too, had been grappling with similar thoughts. I've always loved graphic design, but lately, I've been feeling a bit restless. Maybe it's time for me to explore new creative avenues, to push myself beyond my comfort zone. Daniel's face lit up with a smile. That's great, Alex. I think you should go for it. And who knows, maybe our paths will lead us to something even more amazing together. His words resonated with me, filling me with a sense of hope and possibility. We spent the rest of the evening brainstorming ideas, dreaming about the future, and supporting each other's aspirations. As the weeks went by, we both began to take steps towards our new goals. Daniel started taking classes in criminal psychology, intrigued by the idea of understanding the minds of those he encountered in his line of work. Meanwhile, I began experimenting with different art forms, exploring digital illustration and animation. Our lives were becoming more intertwined, not just in our personal relationship, but also in our professional pursuits. We found ourselves collaborating on small projects, combining our skills to create something unique and meaningful. It was a fulfilling experience, one that brought us even closer together. One afternoon, as we were working on a project in my living room, Daniel looked up from his laptop with a serious expression. "Alex," he said, his voice filled with a newfound determination, "I've been thinking about making a big change." My heart skipped a beat, curious about what he was about to say. "What kind of change?" He took a deep breath, his gaze steady. "I've decided to apply for a position in the criminal investigation department. It's a big step, but I feel like it's the right move for me, a chance to make a deeper impact." I smiled, feeling a surge of pride and admiration. "That's incredible, Daniel. I know you'll be amazing at it. I'm so proud of you." He returned my smile, his eyes filled with warmth. "Thank you, Alex. And what about you? Any new developments in your creative journey?" I nodded, excitement bubbling up inside me. "Actually, yes. I've been approached by a local art gallery to showcase some of my work. It's a small exhibition, but it's a huge opportunity for me." Daniel's face lit up with joy. "That's amazing, Alex. I'm so happy for you. We both have some exciting things happening." We shared a moment of celebration, acknowledging the progress we had made and the potential that lay ahead. It was a reminder that our relationship was not just about supporting each other through challenges, but also about celebrating each other's successes and encouraging each other to pursue our dreams. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, our lives continued to evolve. We faced new challenges, both individually and as a couple, but we faced them together, drawing strength from our shared journey. One evening, as we sat on the couch, wrapped in each other's arms, Daniel looked at me with a tender expression. "You know, Alex," he said softly, "I never imagined my life would take this path, but I'm so grateful it did. Being with you has made me a better person, and I can't wait to see where our journey takes us next." I leaned into him, feeling a deep sense of contentment. "I feel the same way, Daniel. We've come a long way, and I know there's so much more ahead for us." We sat in comfortable silence, the world outside fading away, leaving only the quiet understanding that whatever the future held, we would face it together, hand in hand. Epilogue. A new beginning. The day of my art exhibition arrived, and I stood in the gallery, surrounded by my work, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. Daniel was by my side, his presence a comforting anchor in the whirlwind of the event. As guests began to arrive, I watched with a sense of awe as people admired my art, their expressions filled with appreciation and curiosity. It was a surreal moment, one that I had dreamed of but never fully believed would happen. Daniel leaned in, whispering in my ear, "I'm so proud of you, Alex. You've created something truly beautiful." His words filled me with warmth, and I realized that this moment was not just about my art, but also about the journey we had taken together. We had supported each other, challenged each other, and grown together. And that was the true beauty of our relationship. As the evening wore on, Daniel and I found a quiet corner to sit and reflect. "You know," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "this is just the beginning. There's so much more we can do, so many more dreams we can." I nodded, feeling a sense of excitement for the future. "Yes, and I'm so grateful to have you by my side. We've created something amazing together, and I can't wait to see where our journey takes us next." We shared a smile, a silent promise to continue supporting each other, to continue growing together, and to continue embracing the unseen path that lay ahead. And as the night drew to a close, I knew that this was just the start of an incredible adventure, one filled with love, creativity, and endless possibility.